Let's continue our review for exam 1. That's part 3. It's looking at arrays. So what is an array? As we discussed before, is a collection of data of the same data type. We call that an aggregate data type. Remember, they have to be all the same data type. You can have different data types as part of the array. Is this a valid statement? First array is equal to second array? No, it's not, right? We discussed that we don't allow aggregate operation within arrays, so you have to refer every single index to allow this. Same thing here. Is this valid? If first array is equal to second array? No, again, it's not valid. The reason being, as we discussed before, compiler has to use the base address, which is the address of the first element, the index, and the size of the element to be able to calculate a location where the data is stored. So with that, we needed to identify each element at the time to be able to access them. So no aggregate operator at all. Is it true or false? An array is a composed data type. True. Why should we use constants for the array size? That's always part of our style to try using constants to make the program easy to read, improve readability, improve versatility, so we can modify and we can maintain easier. How do we initialize the array? There's two options to do that we reviewed. The first one is in the declaration, use the curly bracket and list all the values there. Or, of course, we can use a for loop to traverse the array and initialize all the values. True or false? An individual component in an array cannot be passed as an argument of a function. We have to pass the entire array. Now that's false. We can always access one of the elements using the index and pass that to a function. How many different types can be in one array? Data types. We can only have one data type, right? There's no different types. None. They all have to be the same. Let's look at this example here. Given the declaration, we're declaring two arrays of integers of 20 elements, some AR and some AR2. We're saying we're cout some AR3. We output the third element of the array. Is that true or false? That's false, right? We're outputting the fourth element of the array because the index is 3. Starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, so that's fourth element. We're gonna read it from the console and put on the 20 element. Index 20 means goes beyond the size of the array. That's gonna provide produce a compile error. No, it's not, right? That's false. We wish it would do that, but it doesn't. So if we say sum AR is equal to sum AR2, so we're going to transfer the values from AR2 to sum AR. No, we won't. There is no, that's false. There is no aggregate operator, so we have to identify every single index. Let's continue the review on the arrays. What is the advantage of passing by reference? We just discussed on the previous presentation on functions. We can return more than one value because we would just use the parameters by reference to use return. It's less overhead, would be faster and take less memory. So what are the false true about an array? Let's see. Arrays are all passed by reference. That is true because of the large size. Compile defines it all by reference. The name of the array is the address in memory for the first element. Yes, we talk about that. That's called the base address. Array subscripts always begin with 0. That's correct. 0 is the first index. So all are true. How should we declare an array of 20 C strings that can hold up to 11 characters? So let's think about each C string is already an array. 11 characters, we need to put a null termination, so there will be 12 elements, and there's 20 of those. So the first dimension is becoming a two-dimensional array. The first dimension is the 20, then the second dimension is the 12. So char character AR 20, 12. How we would compare an array of integers? So to do that, to compare all the elements we needed to traverse the entire array, so we have to use a for loop and compare each index. There is no aggregation operation for arrays. What will this statement do? We have int item 5, so we're declaring here 5 elements and listed 3 values to be initialized. We're going to declare an array called item with 5 elements and assign the 3 values that are listed there: 2 for index 0, 12 for index 1, 1 for index 2, and then the other 2 indexes would be 0 because there's no value over there. How about if we do this statement here, int item 5 bracket 5 equal to 0. So in that case, we declare the array, call item with 5 elements, and we initialize all the values to 0. What the following statement would do: int item 5, and then we list 6 elements over there to be initialized. We get a compiler error because the compiler see, well, you only have 5 spats, you asked for initialize 6. We can't do this operation. It's true or false. The compiler will give you a narrow bound error when you're using arrays if your index is either too big or too small. That is false, right? Compile doesn't allow to calculate that because your program runs in real time and the indexes will be potential variables throughout your program. So the compiler doesn't take action. That is responsibility of the programmer to check for out of bound. And everything we deal with an array. So what is stored in the array variable? So my array, what is actually being stored in memory for that is in fact the base address. What is the base address we discussed? Is the address of the first element of the array. So remember, the name of the array includes the address of the first element, which is called the base address. Let's continue looking at an array here. So let's look at this sequence of code here. One of the things I wanted to make sure is that you know how we use loops to handle the arrays. I'll have a couple other slides that will review that again, but it's important here you can see how you use loops correct. So when do we use a for loop? So for loop is used on, you can see that on the section below here, when we're going to traverse the entire array, touching every element. In that case, we're out to put all the contents of the array. So we use a for loop. One we use a while loop. But the while loop is used when we don't know if we would traverse the entire array or not. So in this case here, on this example, we have a search, a sequential search. So we're stopping either if you found the element or if we reach the end of the array, and that's what would be the exact case where we need a while loop. So true or false, arrays can be returned as a return value in a function. Can we return an entire array? No, that's false. We can only return an element of the array. Array must be passed by reference using the address operator, the little %. No, that's false, right? They're passing by reference by default, but since all arrays are passed by reference, we don't need to use the little address operator. True or false, when you pass an array, you don't have to include the size in the parameter list for the first dimension. That is true, right? We only require to include size of the other dimensions, but not the first dimension. How should we pass an array when we don't intend to modify its content when the function operated with the array? So we're passing just for reading. We're not modifying anything inside the array. We make that as a constant, right? We'll do constant reference. True or false? C strings are special types of arrays. It is correct. They have some exceptions that allow special for input and output. Let's look at this example here. You're asking if it's true or false that those two statements are equivalent. We have a char name 16 equal to Pete and char name without a size equal to Pete. Are they the same or not? No, they are not equivalent. That's false. The reason being is that on the first one, we're going to create an array of 16 elements, and then we're going to initialize the first 5. We'll initialize the Pete and the null termination. The second one, we're going to create an array of 5 elements and initialize with Pete and the new termination. So the second one, it's you kind of leave in control of the compiler to do it for you, and that's not something you wanna likely be in control as a programmer and use the first implementation. So make sure you understand parallel arrays as part of the material too. We'll have some more information in this review. Okay, which loop and conditions we should use for different implementations using array. Let's see the first one. We're gonna sum all the content of the array. So in that case, we're gonna transverse the entire array. We're gonna use a for loop, and of course we go from 0 to AR size -1 as the index. The second one, we're gonna read it from an input file inside of the array. So we don't know how many elements are we reading. So in that case, we're gonna use a while loop. We use the in file as one of the conditions to leave when the file ended, and make sure we don't pass the size of the array. Search for multiple instances within the array. So we're gonna have to look through the entire array to look at how many times something appeared there. In that case, we're gonna do a for loop and transverse the entire array. Search for one instance in the array. This is a sequential search. That one we know, we use a while loop. We have the found if we find the element, or we stop when we reach the end of the array. We're going to output all the contents of the array, so we're going to have to transverse the entire array using a for loop. Read from a user from the console inside of the array. So user will type information to go inside of the array. Again, we don't know how much information will be typed how many times, so we're going to go with a while loop. We'll have to have an X character or something that allows us to X the loop, as well as we end it if we reach the size of the array. And then the last one here, we initialize an array with a specific value like -1. In that case, we're going to have to transist the entire array, goes a for loop, and we'll go through every element of the array. Okay, what else we're going to look into here? Let's look some more examples here. How we would declare a parallel array that could contain a movie title, the movie genre, and the running time in minutes. So we're going to assume a constant AR size. So we're going to have 3 arrays. The first one will be a string array, the second one will be a string array, and the third one will be an integer array, an int array. And they will be all the same size. So string title, string genre, string time, and they're all AR size. How would you read these values from the above declaration from a file, assuming that each is in one line? So you have the title in one line, the genre in another line, and the duration or the running time in another line. So we're going to use an f-string variable called infile. So let's see how we would build that. Here's the example. You initialize index from 0, then the file is already open. We would have a while loop because we don't know how big this file is, and then includes the in file. If file ended, we can leave it, as well as we still have space on the array, so index is smaller than AR size. And then we have 2 get lines. The first one's for the title, the second from the genre. Then we'll do an extraction for the running time. We have to clean the buffer because we're going to have the next round, we'll be doing a get line again. So we do ignore, then we increase the index and go back and do it again. Make sure you review also how to use files to be able to open and close files, declare, and so on. Okay, let's continue looking here. How we would declare a multi-dimensional array that would hold 10 score for 5 people. So the first thing we have to do is looking at what the more important dimension, what the primary dimension. Primary dimension here is the people, so there's 5 of them, and each one will have 10 scores. So we would declare there as an integer array, int scores 5, that's the first dimension, and 10 for the second dimension. Now, how we will read those values into an array from a file? That's assuming that we're going to use an infile variable, and in this case, we will assume that once we determine that there's a new person on the file, we will read the 10 scores for that person. And there will come one score per row. So here's the code. We needed two index, a row and a column. For the row, because we're not sure how many elements are inside of the file, we're going to use a while loop. So in file to determine the end, and of course if we don't have any more arrays, we're going to stop, so we can only store 5 people. And then on the inner, we're going to use a for loop, because assuming that the person is there, we have to read 10 scores. And then you can see there we read from the in file and extract that and put inside of the element on the array. And then once we end one particular person, we're going to increment the row and go back again and continue to read that. So make sure you review how you do the output in multidimensional array and initialize the elements. So initialization, you have to have an outer loop and an inner loop. We discussed before, the same thing when you output. But review the lecture notes.